Imagine the perfect family photo. A glowing husband, his beautiful pregnant wife, and two adorable smiling daughters. The world saw this picture on social media, believing in the American dream achieved. Now hold that image in your mind and absorb this shattering truth. Within 1 week, that smiling husband would confess to brutally murdering his wife, Shanann, and their two little girls, Bella and Celeste, dumping their bodies at his work site to pursue a new lover. This is the story of Chris Watts, a man who didn't just break the bonds of marriage, he tore down the very foundation of familial love and trust, exposing the terrifying ease with which a monster can hide behind a gentle smile.
Chris and Shanann Watts appeared, at least on the surface, to be the embodiment of modern family success. They lived in a comfortable home in Frederick, Colorado, and were expecting their third child, a son they planned to name Nico. Shanann, a successful independent sales representative for a health company, was an active and effusive presence on social media, frequently documenting their family life, sharing motivational posts, and often praising Chris as her rock and the best dad ever. But the polished veneer that Shanann presented to the world hid significant cracks beneath. The couple had a history of financial struggles, including filing for bankruptcy in 2015. More importantly, their relationship had become strained. Shanann was domineering and organized, while Chris was passive and quiet. They were opposites, and the dynamic, once complementary, had turned toxic. During the summer of 2018, while Shanann was pregnant and away on a family trip to North Carolina with their daughters, Chris Watts began an affair with a coworker named Nicole Kessinger. Kessinger later described Chris as having seemed quiet and submissive, claiming he had told her his marriage was essentially over and that he was in the process of separating from his wife. The affair was the catalyst. But the root cause, as police and profilers later determined, was Chris Watts' deep, pathological desire to escape his life, his family, and the responsibilities he felt smothered by. He sought a reset, a clean slate with Kessinger.
I understand the gravity of the
his family,
situation,
not
and
as
I'm
loved
cooperating
ones,
fully.
but as a colossal obstacle standing in his way.
On Monday, August 13, 2018, Shanann Watts returned home from her trip around 1:48 a.m. Chris Watts was the only other adult in the house. This was the window of the crime. At 10:30 a.m. the same morning, a close friend of Shanann's, Nicole Atkinson, went to the Watts home after being unable to reach Shanann. Atkinson found the house empty. Shanann's car was in the garage, her wallet, phone, and keys were inside, and the wedding ring was on the nightstand. The scene made no sense. Atkinson immediately called the police.
There's nothing left to say,
The
Dad.
police arrived.
It's all gone.
When the police arrived, Chris Watts put on a performance that would become infamous. He initially told police that Shanann had taken the girls and left the house in the early morning hours after they had a difficult conversation. He claimed he didn't know where they went. The next day, Chris Watts gave a highly publicized television interview pleading for his family's return. His demeanor during the interview was widely noted. He appeared overly calm, delivered his lines stiffly, and failed to display the genuine, raw panic expected of a grieving husband. His repeated use of the phrase, "I just want them back," was cold and transactional. Police were suspicious almost immediately. A truly distraught spouse would typically be frantic, not composed. Furthermore, a highly engaged mother like Shanann would never leave her medication, wallet, or phone behind. The lack of forced entry and the car's presence pointed to an inside job. Chris Watts' story began unraveling the moment a search of the house revealed nothing amiss. No signs of struggle, no evidence of an intruder. The police placed surveillance on Chris, and his subsequent behavior only deepened their suspicions.
The investigation quickly focused on Chris's activities on the morning of August 13. Police learned he worked to Anadarko Petroleum, operating oil and gas wells. Crucially, they learned he had been engaging in an affair. Confronted with the evidence of his affair and the inconsistencies in his story, Chris Watts agreed to take a polygraph test. He failed it spectacularly. The FBI and Colorado Bureau of Investigation then stepped in, and the pressure became overwhelming. The first confession. In the early hours of August 15, Chris Watts, sitting with his father and investigators, gave his first confession. He initially spun a defensive story. He claimed he saw Shanann strangling Celeste on the baby monitor after he had told her he wanted a divorce. He then claimed he snapped, rushing in and strangling Shanann in a rage. He stated that Bella had died afterward. This was a desperate attempt to frame the murders as a crime of passion and a defensive reaction, a classic maneuver to mitigate charges. The investigators, however, knew his story was a lie. The sequence and logistics of the murders were completely implausible. The fact that he confessed at all, however, gave them the leverage needed to secure a deal. The location of the bodies. Chris Watts then led investigators to the site of his crimes, a remote oil field owned by Anadarko Petroleum in Weld County. Shanann Watts was found buried in a shallow grave near 2 oil tanks. The bodies of his daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3, were found submerged inside 2 separate large crude oil storage tanks. The horrifying details of the disposal site confirmed the cold, calculating nature of the crime. He used his professional access and knowledge of the site's isolation to hide the evidence. It required immense physical exertion and planning to place the small bodies through the narrow hatches of the oil tanks, demonstrating a chilling level of deliberation. The discovery of the bodies was the final tragic confirmation of the evil that had been hidden within the Watts home.
The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Rourke, was determined to seek justice swiftly. Facing overwhelming evidence and the psychological weight of the recovered bodies, Chris Watts accepted a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. It was only during later interviews with investigators from the FBI and CBI in February 2019 that he finally revealed the true, horrific sequence of events, likely driven by a desire for a clean conscience before God. The true timeline, revealed in 2019. The murder of Shanann. After Shanann returned home, the couple argued about Chris's request for a divorce. Chris killed Shanann by strangling her in their bedroom while she slept or shortly after the argument. The transportation. He wrapped Shanann's body in a sheet. He then woke his 2 daughters, telling them that their mother was sick. He loaded his wife's body and his 2 living daughters into the truck and drove them to the Anadarko worksite. The murder of the daughters. At the worksite, the 2 little girls were still alive. Chris murdered Celeste first, suffocating her with a blanket, and then dumped her body into the oil tank. Bella, the 4-year-old, witnessed her father murdering her sister. Watts admitted that Bella then pleaded with him, saying, "Daddy, no," before he proceeded to suffocate her as well and dump her body into the second oil tank. The true motive was brutally clear: escape. He saw his children as the last link to Shanann, making his reset impossible. The murders were committed to erase his entire past. Watts pleaded guilty to multiple counts of first-degree murder. On November 19, 2018, he was sentenced to 5 life sentences, 5 consecutive, 2 concurrent, without the possibility of parole. Shanann's family requested that he not be given the death penalty to prevent the possibility of years of appeals and trials, a compassionate decision that allowed the family some measure of peace.
The Chris Watts case captivated and horrified the world.
becoming one of the most covered true crime stories of the digital age. It demands a closer look at the psychological mechanics and societal implications. 1. The narcissistic collapse. Chris Watts represents a classic case of narcissistic personality disorder meeting severe conflict. The profile suggests he built a life, the house, the wife, the kids, that served as a facade of the good husband for external validation. However, when his affair offered a path to a new, less complicated source of narcissistic supply, Nickel Kessinger, the old life became an intolerable burden. His inability to cope with the complex, messy emotional process of divorce, coupled with the threat of losing his public image, led to a narcissistic collapse. Instead of confronting reality, he sought to instantly and completely eliminate the source of his pain, his family. The act of disposal, dumping his family in crude oil, was a final symbolic attempt to cleanse himself of the life he resented. The deceit of the digital age. The widespread fascination stems from the stark contrast between the curated online image and the monstrous reality. Shanann's social media was a constant stream of manufactured happiness. This case serves as a chilling reminder that the lives we see on our screens are often meticulously crafted fiction, concealing deep, potentially violent truths. The accessibility and intimacy of the Watts' online life made the betrayal feel personal and shocking to millions of strangers. The witness, Bella's final plea. The most heartbreaking detail, Bella's final plea, "Daddy, no," is critical to understanding the depth of Watts' psychopathy. He wasn't acting in a blind rage when he killed the girls. He was making conscious, deliberate decisions to silence two witnesses and remove the final emotional obstacles to his freedom. The act of murdering his children after his wife, especially after Bella pleaded for her life, confirms the lack of human empathy and the presence of cold, goal-oriented cruelty. The legacy of Chris Watts is a shattered perception of the nuclear family. It is a cautionary tale that the quietest, most submissive person in a relationship can harbor the most destructive violence. We must look beyond the facades and recognize that the greatest dangers often lie in the places we feel safest.
Chris Watts is now serving his sentence in a Wisconsin maximum security prison, living out his remaining days isolated with the memory of his atrocious acts. He forfeited his right to peace the moment he chose murder over honesty. Today we honor the memories of Shanann Watts, a dynamic and loving mother, Bella, the inquisitive and protective 4-year-old, and Celeste, the playful 3-year-old Nico. We hope this comprehensive investigation serves to educate and to remind us to always look closer at the surface. If you found this deep dive into the Watts case impactful, please like this video and subscribe to your channel name. Tell us in the comments, what aspect of Chris Watts' televised performance do you find the most unsettling? Thank you for joining us to confront this difficult truth. Until next time, be safe.